Hi, everyone. I'm going to give it a couple moments just for people to sign in here, and then we'll start. All right. Hi, guys. My name's Danielle Angelari. I'm the executive director of NAMI Northern Illinois, which is an affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Our organization is dedicated to improving lives of individuals and families impacted by mental illness through support, education, advocacy, and hope. Over the past year, the world has changed for all of us, not to mention the personal loss that many have experienced, past or present. I believe we're all dealing with one stage of grief or another. Grief encompasses multiple feelings and reactions that we must manage, and if we name what we're dealing with, perhaps we can manage it. I'm honored to introduce to you Delinda Grindle, who is a licensed clinical social worker that serves as the Director of Grief Services and as a grief counselor at KP Counseling. She provides services to children, adolescents, adults, families, and couples in both individual and group counseling settings. Delinda provides years of experience in leadership and organizational development and works offsite offering grief presentations just like this one tonight in churches, schools, and other organizations. Her philosophy in counseling is companioning individuals in their grief journeys. She believes that the journey involves reflecting on the physical, emotional, cognitive, social, and spiritual areas of one's life. If you do have any questions, please hold them to the end and type them in the chat box or the question and answer box for me, and we'll get them answered for you. And Delinda, thank you again. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's a pleasure tonight to be able to talk about something that I'm so passionate about, which is journeying people in grief. In addition to being the Director of Grief Services for KP Counseling, I also about 10 years ago started the aftercare program at Fitzgerald's Funeral Home here in Rockford. And I provide aftercare services, grief services to families for up to a year through the funeral home. I also do sit on the board of the Haven Network here in Rockford, Illinois, which is a non-for-profit that supports families that lose their babies and infants also. So I'm very passionate about the work that I do, and I appreciate NAMI inviting me tonight to talk to you two, especially during this very difficult time when we have not only loss of loved ones, but also the grief that accompanies being in a pandemic. So tonight I'm going to touch lightly on both of those things and hopefully answer questions that you will have. Plus, maybe we'll be doing a follow-up session with NAMI too, where we can actually address more of the grieving part that is happening with the loss of loved ones during this time. So I'm going to be sharing a presentation online so that you can see the slides that I will be using, plus take notes if you would like to. So that's what you're going to be seeing here that I'm going to share with everyone. Hopefully my slides are going to go here too. So first, I just wanted to let everyone know that there is a difference between grief and mourning. In our society, we have a tendency to use the word grief because it's the word that we're the most familiar with. So grief is actually the internal emotional and physical response that we have to the death of a loved one or life transitions that we go through. And every human being will experience grief. Then mourning is being able to take those emotional feelings and thoughts and sharing them with others. Or you can do it through many different creative ways, such as journaling and other art forms that we have. Everyone's grief journey is very unique. So it's real important that we don't compare ourselves to each other. Again, because of just the depth of grief, no two people's grief journey is the same. The key about mourning is that not all human beings will mourn loss. Mourning is a choice that we have to make in order to go on our grief journey and to talk about our thoughts and feelings, share those with someone, and experience grief in many different ways. So not all human beings will mourn because, again, like I said, it is an individual choice that we have to make to do that. So what I wanted to talk on first was just what I have through the years collected as our natural expressions of grief. I have a large sheet that I use with the clients that I work with. So what you're seeing is just a real small version of some common grief reactions that we have to loss of life, and what we're experiencing in the pandemic, or both that can be combined. So some of the things that you may be experiencing yourselves or you may have watched others experience are things like anger and anxiety and disbelief and distress and denial, depression and sadness. Some physical changes we'll see are appetite changes or sleep changes. We may feel very fatigued and exhausted. And sometimes we may feel a real heaviness that we carry, kind of like, I always think of it as carrying a backpack of rocks, and just the heaviness you may feel, carrying that backpack is what we can experience in grief too. We'll have increased stress. Many people may feel loneliness, especially with loss of a loved one, especially in the pandemic, because at the beginning we had to shelter in place. And now currently we're taking some steps back to a different phase, and just our own individual choice to maybe self-quarantine. So there can be feelings of loneliness that we have. We can have loss of sleep and appetite. And again, like I said, a sadness or depression. And even, currently we're kind of all, at least people that have been sharing with me, feeling this real sense of unrealness, or I would call it time distortion, which is definitely what we feel when we lose a loved one too. And then just shock in general. And I think back for myself when the pandemic started in March, just thinking, okay, this will last, a couple of weeks, and then we will be back in what we quote consider our normal way of living. And so when that didn't happen and we were sheltering in place, and now we're in our 8th month of the pandemic, I think there's just a shock that can run, within us, a disbelief that this is really happening, to us. And so I know many people have shared with me kind of too, where did the time go? It seems like we went from spring to fall real quickly. So the first thing I wanted to touch on here is just loss of a loved one during COVID-19. What I am experiencing with clients is this heightened grief complications because of our pandemic restrictions that many of our clients I work with through the funeral home were not able to be with their loved one because they were in the hospital or some care facility, such as a nursing home, so that they were not able to spend the time with that and be by that person's side. Also, we've experienced through the funeral home is just being able to spend adequate time with the body after the death, and or putting a hold on the funeral due to the restrictions that we have of the amount of people that can attend. The thing with funerals they really are not a rite of closure, because grief is a lifelong journey that we're on. Rather, the funeral is really the rite of initiation and allowing us to say goodbye to the body and saying hello to this new relationship, which is now one of memory. And so the funerals, or the rituals that we have, memorial services, allow us to start on that path of good grief, is what I call it. So we are limited in doing that. Funerals, actually, the ceremonies provide structure, and that structure is what holds us up as individuals, allowing us to meet our mourning needs and acknowledging and accepting the reality of this loss that we have experienced. Funerals and memorial services and visitations allow us to share memories And again, converting our relationship with our loved one from one of past to one of present, which would be in our memory. And it gives us an opportunity to give and receive social support. And again, express our grief out loud through hugs and the sharing of memory and thinking of the meaning of life and death, and helping us to start to think about how eventually do we live a life moving forward with meaning and purpose. The one thing that I've also have learned through the pandemic is that if the loved one passed away from COVID-19, that sometimes the individuals or the family as a whole can experience a stigma, such as social avoidance or rejection, because people are fearful of the pandemic. So a family may feel that, which creates fear and anger then towards just other people. So I do want you to realize that there is some stigma that lies within this pandemic if the individual himself or herself passed away from COVID-19. So some of us may experience people that might avoid contacting us, or our family members that would normally reach out to us. And stigma is likely to occur when we don't know the facts. And so we really need to learn and understand the facts about the pandemic and share them with our extended family and friends, and just others in our community, which I do think the Rockford community has done a good job in keeping us, up to date on the pandemic. And I know that our community too is learning as we go along with this. Again, as it occurred in the spring, it was something none of us have ever been through before. And so I know the healthcare system and the researchers are all trying to work very hard in, keeping us up to date and handling it the best they can. So I think we just need to really learn to be gracious with each other during this time and everything that it's been entailing. So ways to cope with the feelings of grief after the loss of a loved one is to ask help from others, possibly seeking out grief counseling or support groups, which again have changed since the pandemic. We're pretty much doing those through Zoom now, because we're not able to gather in groups in person. It's also important if you have that grief is also a spiritual journey for us. And so I'm not necessarily talking religion as much as I'm talking, it could be our faith. It's just our values and our belief system too, which is very different for everyone. So I also encourage people to seek out spiritual support if that's been a large part of their life. And then just seeking support from other trusted individuals. If you have friends, family, coworkers that you trust and feel safe with being vulnerable to, then I really encourage that we reach out to others and to one another. Connecting with other people, if it's through Zoom, FaceTime, we have to find ways to connect with our family and friends with the circumstances that we're in with regard to the pandemic too. So it's important just to express our needs to others so that others know how they can best support us during this time when we've lost our loved one. Another important thing that we can do is just create memories. If it's developing a memory book to remember our loved ones, and then asking our family and friends to contribute to their memories and their stories. That's the one thing you've seen through the years that has grown on websites for the funeral homes, is to allow people to be able to share memories or to share their condolences with families. And so it's real important. That's one way to link you to those families that we currently maybe are not able to physically be in touch with, is to share those things through the funeral homes where their loved ones, where they're seeking services. So they can get those printed up and will have access to those. And I don't know if any of you out there have lost your loved one during this time and have utilized that on the website of the funeral home that you've used, but I know it has really helped many families to bring some comfort and peace to them, knowing that others are out there thinking about them and sharing memories of their loved one that maybe they didn't know about. it can bring immense comfort to families. So I really encourage all of us as we move forward here, if we do have friends that lose their loved ones, that we communicate with them, through the funeral home websites too. And then again, just through texting and emailing and FaceTiming and whatever ways we can stay in contact. And then just, it's important too that we can still, even with the pandemic and the limited, the limits that have been set forth by the funeral homes, which the health department is what they have to adhere to too, is to be able to create ceremonies or rituals. We can still do that. And so I wanted to share with you what are ways in which we can have these special ceremonies or rituals. So it's really important to realize that a ritual or a small ceremony, whatever it may be, is better than not having anything at all. Because as I stated earlier, the importance to our ceremonies and our rituals are to be able to allow us to start that grieving process and that mourning journey that we have to be on when we lose a loved one. So it's real important moving forward that if we have the opportunity to spend private time with the body, helps mourners to acknowledge the reality of the loss that they are experiencing. And again, begins that transition from having a relationship of present with the person who passed away to one of memory. Holding a immediate ceremony is helpful. We can do those online even now through Zoom, and we can have intimate graveside committals with groups of people too. And it's never, I just want everyone to understand that's never too late to have a ceremony, especially in these challenging times that we're working in. And I really do, I have been encouraging families to it's okay to have multiple ceremonies. And if we have to postpone, what we would consider the normal funeral, what we're used to, we may have to do that at a later date when facilities are open up to having larger crowds in them. I know that I feel, thankful that some of the churches have reopened in this area, and thus allowing to have, maybe even 100 people or a little over that at funerals due to how many they can hold within their church and then the percentage of which they're allowed to have. So it is a positive that we do have those locations too that we can utilize during this time. So I just wanted to share with you just 3 ceremonies that nurture our healing process, so you have an idea of what we can do moving forward. So a simple candle lighting ceremony in your home, we can do that. So we'll just gather the members of the household together. And if there's people outside of the ones that we're living in our home with that, again, have maybe been cautious about sheltering in place, haven't been in contact with many people, then it's safe and you can invite them into your home. Again, we can all practice the safe procedure of wearing masks in our home too, to just be safe. So what's nice to do in a home is if you have a table, you can place photos and memorabilia on the table. You just kind of gather around that table. If you want to play a piece of important music to the person that passed away, or you have 1 or 2 short prayers or poems that you want to read, you can do that. I've also had people will hold small candles. You just hold a small candle, and then one person would light their candle. Then you would pass that flame and light on to the person standing next to you, and you can share a memory or a thought at that time. And then by the time everyone does that, all these individual candles are lit. I've also encouraged people to have a larger candle in the middle of their table. That would be representing the person that passed away too. So you can light that first, and then, a person would take the light from that candle and light around the table. It's also nice if you can include a prayer or a song or a piece of music to close that candle lighting ceremony. It's a good way to just kind of end and have some peaceful, silent time to think about and remember and honor the person who passed away. The second thing is just to have simple gatherings as soon as it's safe to do so. So a special date, maybe you might be able to do that, would be a birthday or the anniversary of the loss too, is definitely a time that many people will tend to have another type of gathering. Think of it as a memorial service. And even if you had a small funeral or an online ceremony after the death, you still have these opportunities to celebrate this life that was so precious to you. Another thing to do is we can hold another ceremony between a year and a half to 24 months after the loss. And it can be a second ceremony, and we can either gather at the cemetery or just the final resting place where the person may be. You know, some people have individuals that are cremated and they have the urns. And so if they have them in their home, sometimes they'll go to a park or a special place like that and do another type of gathering where we can have readings and music and, again, memory sharing time. The ceremony, actually, the benefit of the ceremony is that it provides the reality to this loss, and it's recalling that person's life that they lived and shared with us. It provides support to one another. It gives us the opportunity to express our thoughts and our feelings, and gives meaning to this life that was shared, with those who are present during this difficult time. So that's just a couple, 3 different ways that we can have ceremonies and help in our nurturing process too. And there's multiple other things that we can do to, again, continue to honor this precious life during this time. I also, because I know our time is limited tonight and there's just so much that we could talk about, I also wanted to address the pandemic also. The losses that we experience in the pandemic, the stressors that we can have, our common responses, and how do we cope with our feelings during this time? And then how do we prepare for coming out of this pandemic also? Because there's going to be changes that come with that. So I just kind of lightly wanted to address these different areas too. And then I wanted to be able to open it up for questions if there are some. So the things that I have seen within the pandemic itself, losses within the pandemic, are this loss of connection with our family, our friends, and our religious organizations. We've had loss and drastic changes to daily routines and the ways of life that bring comfort to us. We could have a loss of job. We can have, or our hours are cut back. We can have a loss of what I quote as normalcy. And I put that in quotes because for each of us, normalcy means something very different. But if you reflect back on before the pandemic and just how you were living your life and what that looked like, there has been many changes throughout these 8 months to that normalcy that we have. We also have had a loss of social connection. When we had to shelter in place, we had loss of in-person with family, friends, or organizations. We've lost the ability to have special events and celebrating milestones such as graduations, weddings, vacations. I so much appreciate kind of the creativity that people have been doing with some of those special events, those and milestones. But again, very different from what we were used to prior to the pandemic. We can also really experience this loss of what the future holds. And I think many of us are probably at that place right now. We knew that, in the summer, they were telling us to prepare for the fall because of just the influenza and then COVID too occurring at the same time. And so we've now noticed that the statistics are increasing again, and we don't know kind of what lies ahead of us. And when will the vaccine be here? When will we start being able to receive it? And then how is that going to change, our lives too? So then also we can just have this, sometimes we can experience this sense of guilt for grieving over losses that maybe seem less important than the loss of a life that we've experienced during this time too. So, but I really state how we need to be gracious to ourselves during this time, because most of us are just trying to find our way through this. We don't have a guidebook, and we don't it's kind of like we're setting out in the wilderness and trying to take this journey and not knowing what lies ahead of us. So I am a real firm believer in just trying to remember to be gracious to ourselves in the midst of this, and to be respectful of one another and just the different things that another person may be experiencing, and how do we best support one another during this time. And so here's some of the pandemic stressors that I have also seen that have transpired. First, we have an individual stress. We are feeling disconnected. Some may be feeling very isolated. The older population that sits in our nursing homes, people that are in the hospital, are really experiencing this isolation. And many people are also experiencing the fear of getting sick during the pandemic. If it's not for the pandemic symptoms and getting sick with just COVID-19, it's what if I get sick and need surgery, or what if, I have to be in the hospital for an extended period of time. So people are really, I'm seeing a lot of stress with that too, just the fear of not wanting anything to happen to themselves during this time. Many people face financial stress, just the loss of income due to reduced hours or being furloughed or laid off from the jobs. So there's a lot of financial stress. We also have family stress that people are experiencing, and just how do we balance learning how to work from home if we've been doing that, caring for your children 24 hours a day and assisting in their educational needs, and then just our own household responsibilities. I also realized something I forgot to even mention here in the family stresses. What if we are in that sandwich generation where we're, raising children and taking care of elderly parents? So there can be a lot of family stress and a lot of family dynamic changes that have happened during, COVID-19 here. There's also a sense of cultural stress that we're experiencing, just the changes in our local community. Will our favorite restaurants survive the pandemic? We mourn for these businesses that are trying so hard to stay open during this time and be creative in staying open. And, just even to the things of, when do I go back to my gym? And I know some of the gyms have already opened back up. I know some the smaller ones have had to close again. So just our physical activity places that we used to go to, and just what will Rockford and the surrounding areas look like when we bounce back from COVID-19, and just the financial hardships that have been created individually, as families, as businesses, as non-for-profits. So I know everyone's being challenged in some way or another, which then leads to this cumulative stress. So it's encompassing all those things that I just stated earlier, as well as just our media consumption that we're having too. I always try to encourage people to take breaks from social media, because sometimes that can really add to our stress and anxiety levels. And especially, again, we just came through a election, which I know created a lot of concern for people. So sometimes we need to have that break in just social media, and maybe do things that we find uplifting. I always kind of chuckle with some of my clients, because I say, think back to when you're a kid, and what were some of the activities that you really loved to do when you were a child? Because I think all of us can reflect back and feel those really good feelings of happiness and joy that we used to do. If it was playing with silly putty or Play-Doh or coloring, or even flying a kite, just playing out in the being out in the yard and just being present out there. So I've even encouraged people to do those things to help just lift our spirits up during this time, and know that we can have fun in the midst of all of this too. So some of the common responses that we see is there can be anger, because there's so much that we can't control. Some of us have been asked to work from home, or kids that are learning virtually now, or kids that are going to school and learning virtually. Local stores not having ample stock. I think if we all reflect back to March 16th, when I believe that evening was the night that things started to close, just trying to find the necessities that we needed, and just how hard that was to do. And even in some of the stores now, they're still not back to full capacity with some of those things. We can also be experiencing anticipatory grief, just this fearfulness, mentally and emotionally, trying to, we prepare for the worst scenario, I think. And sometimes our minds are very powerful and want to take us to those places too. So more loss yet to come. And what's the world around us? Are we ever going to be the same, as we were before? And many comments made to me are, I don't think things are ever going to be like they used to. There's going to be a lot of changes that we'll be, experiencing. So there's that anticipatory grief is what I talk about. And I want to reflect back to loss too, to personal loss through death too. We do experience anticipatory grief there too. So anytime specific dates are approaching, sometimes it could be a monthly, just the monthly date. This is the first month, the second month. Any kind of birthdays, anniversaries, the anniversary of the loss, we can experience this anticipatory grief, which again are feelings of anxiety and the fearfulness of what's that day going to look like as it approaches. I have seen very heightened anxiety symptoms in people. Again, just I think that kind of links back to that, what we can't control, what we don't know. And if we had anxiety prior to the pandemic, that's just, again, has heightened it even more. We can have, again, changes in sleeping and eating patterns. I've had many people share with me that they find a lot of comfort in food. So we may find ourselves eating more than normal or eating more comfort foods. We also have chronic stress that many of us are under, again, back to work or, the changes in our home life. And so that impacts our immune system. So we must remember that. So that's why it's really important to work hard at, trying to get good sleep, trying to eat as healthy as we can, trying to get some form of movement or exercise, because we need to keep our physical self, as healthy as we can during this time because of this overload of stress that we're seeing and how it impacts our body. You may feel very exhausted during this time too, and very fatigued, and maybe you normally aren't that way. But again, if you reflect back on it, just think about all that stress that we're carrying too, and these many different changes. So it's going to exhaust us and make us feel fatigued. So we need to work hard on finding times to rest. I'm a very big proponent of napping if you're a person that has that opportunity to do that, to rest during the day too. We can just feel out of sorts, and it's really hard to stay emotionally regulated. I've been sharing with a lot of people too. I just myself even feel this, it's an emotional overload is what it is. It's sensory overload. Like all my senses have been affected in one way or another. And just sometimes we feel really out of sorts and we don't feel ourselves. It's almost like, who's this Delinda? I don't recognize her at all. And so that's natural to feel that way, because I think a lot of people will say to me, I just feel like I'm going crazy. And I hear that too when someone's lost a loved one, because of all these natural expressions of grief we go through, that you just don't feel like yourself. And so we always think, well, am I going crazy? That will, but you're not. It's just, these are the natural things that we're experiencing during this time. We can also experience forgetfulness or a hopelessness feeling. And here's what I've seen. We have a lot of hypervigilance, meaning that we have these really increased alertness and persistent anxiety with regards to symptoms of COVID. So if someone's around us coughing or sneezing, or if someone's invaded what I would call my personal space and not social distancing the way that we've been, asked to, or if I'm out and someone's not wearing their mask correctly, that's what hypervigilance is. It's this increased alertness to our surroundings and the people around us. You may find yourself getting irritable more easily too, if maybe it's with coworkers or your partner or your children. And again, it's the sometimes we just have to take that quiet moments to sit and reflect on what are we upset about, or what's frustrating me, why am I feeling so stressed, and trying to work through those things, so that maybe we can reduce that irritability. Because here's the key is normally for most of us, those feelings that we're experiencing individually are going to come out, and they're usually going to be directed to the people we love the most, which are the people that we're living with. And so again, I think we all have to work at trying to be in touch with our own feelings and what we're experiencing. If talking, again, if it's talking to a counselor, talking to a family member, talking to friends, and trying to process through our own feelings and thoughts, so that then we're not reacting to people in ways that we normally wouldn't. We're also experiencing isolation, just protecting ourselves from other people's stress and anxiety and depression too, so that it doesn't trigger those symptoms within us. And then just this overall feeling of sadness. It's kind of like just this, I guess that's the best way to put it, underlying sadness, just kind of this, state of low-lying sadness, I guess, that I experience from people. So how do we cope with these feelings of grief during this pandemic? Again, just as with physical loss, it's real important to acknowledge our losses and identify them. We want to label them. We want to validate and affirm our feelings of grief, if it's through talking, writing, art, music, or other creative ways that we can be expressive. Through photography, that would be another way. Again, but the importance is being able to acknowledge those feelings and those thoughts and giving voice to them and talking through them. I believe in companioning one another and being there for one another, and trying to be a good listener, an active listener, being able to maybe share thoughts with people on what's helped you or what you're finding beneficial, but trying not to tell people what to do, because none of us are in each other's shoes. And so it's hard to know what we're journeying, just individually, but to be able to listen and, say, I've really been taking a walk every day, finding that that quiet time allows me to calm my mind and kind of refocus. Maybe that's something you would want to try. So helping with suggestions like that. Just acting with kindness and grace, building up hope. I'm going to, for those of you that I will be able to get email addresses for, I have a really good article on hope that I would love to forward to each of you if you're open to receiving that. Again, I think as a human being, I really believe that hope is what keeps us going, from day to day. So it's real important too for each of us to work hard at developing and maintaining a daily, regular, structured routine. I guess I can share for myself, I like to get up early in quiet time when it's still dark out, and be able to do some little reflective time and devotional work, and drink my coffee, and just have that moment to myself before I start my day out. But it's so important to keep a regular structured routine if we can. I especially recommend that with children, because they are used to routine, especially if you think about it, going to school an 8-hour day, just as we do when we go into our work environment. Engaging in any form of spiritual activity, if it's going for a walk in nature, because many people feel connected that way. Again, if it's through yoga or meditation, if it's through reading something that's affirming and positive, anything that lifts our spirits and helps to give us that hope, hope for that things will change, keeping us positive. Doing things that lighten your mood, taking breaks, reading, watching movies, doing puzzles or board games, dancing, cooking or baking, doing a hobby, playing music, there's many different calming applications on our phones that we can use, practicing mindfulness. That's what I love about the fall season, is just when we were going through fall here, being able to walk outside and look at the trees changing, beautiful colors of the leaves, smelling the air. It's kind of like after a good rainstorm like we had tonight, walking out and smelling the fresh air, from the rain, sometimes listening to the wind. Again, just really being mindfulness of our surroundings and the joy and the thankfulness that we can feel, by looking out in nature, watching the birds at our bird feeders, anything that we can do to help lift our spirit and our soul up. And again, I think it's important too, in the midst of all of this, that we practice gratitude, that we can maybe start our day with a reflection of thankfulness. And because I have used this with my clients throughout the years, and many have come back and said, when I start my day out thinking, just being thankful for my health, thankful I can get out of bed, and can really start grounds us. It's kind of a grounding technique to make the rest of our day and to help keep us aware of the good things that are happening in your life during this time. It's really good too to maybe end our day that way. So when you're lying in bed at night, just reflect back on your day and maybe what are a couple things you're thankful for. Did you spend some time in just quietness to calm your own soul and your own spirit? Were you able to have one good positive experience today? And also, what's a way that you could reach out to someone? Was there a way in your day that you were able to reach out to someone else and, help them through their day? So these things are good things to practice during this time of the pandemic too. Also it's good to do when we're mourning the loss of a loved one. Sometimes it's good just to identify negative thinking and challenge that with a positive self-talk or kind of reframing it and finding the best situation that there is out there too. So for example, with the pandemic, we don't know what lies ahead, but the positive thing is that we have many, many people that are working really hard in these labs and developing a vaccine for us. I mean, these people could be working around the clock and trying desperately to help find a vaccine for all of us so that we can continue to move forward. Think of all the hospital workers, that are in the hospitals working with these individuals that have this COVID-19 and the things that they've been giving up, their family time and the first responders that have been responding and the churches that are reaching out and feeding people. So there's a lot of positive things happening within our community that I think if we can focus on those too, helps to kind of offset the negative thinking we might be having. I also mentioned earlier about monitoring social media. Again, just if you're getting information, make sure it's from credible resources and kind of distancing ourselves from that sensationalized media. So just again, taking breaks from it. Maybe your break is at the end of the day and you just come home, and once you're home and with your family, everyone just takes a break from social media and we give each other that time to, play a board game or talk. And because sometimes so much social media can really be a stressor to us all too. One thing is just to practice really healthy behaviors, going back to our basics. Are we eating nutritionally? Are you staying hydrated? Do you get plenty of sleep? And are you staying active? Getting some form of movement or exercise is important. Walking is great for all of us, easy on our joints and our bodies, so we can go out and do that. Just keeping medical appointments that you have is very important for all of us. And also, if we feel like this stress and anxiety or our depression is getting in way of just our daily activities, then it's a good time to talk to our PCP or our healthcare provider. And maybe it might be a time to be talking about medication if we feel that's appropriate. It's also good to just reevaluate expectations and focus on what you can realistically accomplish. Again, helping keep us in a positive way. So, setting little small goals that we can accomplish, realizing that maybe we don't need to put high expectations on ourselves during this time, and just to focus on what I can accomplish. Again, I'm sure many of you have found very creative ways to stay in contact with others. And I'm so thankful for our technology today because we do have this opportunity to video chat through Zoom or FaceTime. So important. So I'm so thankful for our technology as a way to stay connected and see other people's faces and hear their voices. Also, telephone calls, texting, emailing. And I've really been trying to encourage people, especially here during the winter time, because now we're going to have another challenge with us is going to be winter. And the fact that, sometimes the weather doesn't allow us to get out of our homes. Also, the grayness that comes with winter time can also add another depth to our grief and our mourning that we're experiencing. So I've been really encouraging people to write letters and notes to individuals, something they can receive through the mail, that they can touch, and also knowing people have taken time out to write those letters or notes to one another. So I really have been challenging people to do that. It's a great thing to do during the winter time. If I'm writing one note a day, giving me something to focus on outside of myself and reaching out and extending that care to others. Again, if you feel it's important to talk to a professional, a counselor, then you may, want to seek out those services too during this time. And just trying to stay connected to the present and focusing on the aspects of your life that you have control over right now, which would be pretty much like our daily routines. So again, just trying to stay focused on the present and what we're living in. So I wanted to end today just touching a little bit on how do we prepare for coming out of COVID-19. I was just thinking about this a couple days ago because I thought we're adjusting to living within this pandemic and have made many changes. So what do we do when now we get this vaccine and we get vaccinated and now we're preparing to come out of COVID-19? So one of the things I think is so important is just to be really patient and flexible. Again, your self-care and what I call throughout when I work with people, nurturing yourself and becoming the healthiest self that you can. Just kind of mentally being prepared for what life will look like when some of these restrictions are lifted and we go back to being, quote, I guess, close to normal as we were before. So trying to remain productive and positive, I think, is just really important for all of us to do. Again, managing our expectations, like I mentioned earlier, just, do your best, do the best that you can do and accept that is all you can do for right now. So again, if we stay in the day, that's where most of our peace can come because I know what's going on around me today. I don't know what I'm going to see tomorrow, but I do know what I'm seeing today and being able to accept that and be present in that. And I think you've probably heard me say tonight, the word grace, maybe 3 times or 4. So again, giving yourself grace, just be gentle to yourself, be kind to yourself, and just prioritize what is important to you. Ask yourself these, are your expectations placed on you by yourself or others? Often we expect much more from ourselves than anyone would ever ask of us. And so we think that we must be performing at 100% all the time, all of our duties. And that maybe at this time is not really a realistic expectation. I know when I go into companies and talk to them about how do we companion someone in grief with loss of their loved ones, one of the things I really talk about is just this. If our thoughts are that someone's going to come back to work and be 100% productive after the loss of their loved one, then that's a really high expectation to set on that individual. And because it won't happen, we do not function that way as human beings. We do not come back at 100%. We're pretty much in a survival mode after we lose a loved one and just trying to do our best from one day to the next. And so I think that being grace to oneself when it comes to our expectations is real important to do. I also think it's really important to practice positive self-care. Monitor your stress and anxiety, again, because you know yourself the best. And if you have any underlying health issues that have developed or worsened during this time, it's important to be looking at those. You want to feel your best post quarantine. So when the vaccine comes and we can, go back to maybe some of these restrictions are lifted, we want to be in the healthiest place that we can be too. What I have seen throughout working with individuals is that this mismanaged anxiety can lead to really unwanted consequences, both to our health as well as relationships at home or work too. So again, real important to just be aware of yourself and aware of your own thoughts and feelings, and how are you working through those is so important. And just remain productive the best you can. Maintain a regular routine, try to wake up at the same time each day, kind of have a set, plan or a set routine for the day. It really does, it's uplifting for us when we can remain productive. However that looks for each of you out there tonight. Just real important to do that. So that's really kind of where I'm at with what I developed tonight. Again, I know that we have, a limited time, and I would be more than happy to come back again and share some more in detail with people of what they might find helpful to them. So I'm going to, I guess, open it up for questions, because I do want to respect the time frame that they've given me and us to be together. So I hope there'll be something you can walk away with this evening. If it's just one bit of information that you might be able to use, that would be wonderful. So I'm opening it up for questions.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, I can read them to Delinda for you if you want to put it in the chat box or the Q&A section. In regards to like you losing a loved one, I guess, what if someone feels like they'll never quite overcome it, the loss of a loved one? Or what do you suggest that someone does?
Okay, well, to answer that question, first of all, we don't ever really get over the loss of our loved ones, which is a verbiage that we might hear out from other people. Sometimes people might say, well, it's been this amount of time, you should get over it by now. The thing is, our grief is a journey we're on for the rest of our lives. And the important part is what helps us to get to that place where I would say we find peace with the loss, or we reconcile with the loss, is again taking that journey and making the conscious effort to mourn that loss, which takes a lot of work. But you have to do that with someone. There needs to be that person you can go to where you can talk about what you're feeling and thinking and experiencing, and being able to tell your story. And sometimes we have to tell our story more than once. We have to tell the story over and over again to continue to work through this significant loss. Because if you think about it, how the loss occurred is also part of our grief journey. So it's very different if I experience loss from suicide, from homicide, a sudden death, a terminal illness, death during the pandemic, child loss. These are all so very unique and so very different, that the important part is to be able to take that journey and find that person that you can become vulnerable with and talk to, and be able to find a place within you where you feel at peace with that loss. So does that answer the person's question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have another question here. Do you have experience helping people with the loss of a pet?
Yes, actually I have. Yes. I've had, I've been doing this work for quite some time, and have had multiple people come and talk to me about their pet loss. And very interesting, because when they would first contact me, their first words were, I feel how did they state it? I feel bad that I'm asking to come, if you would see me for counseling due to a pet loss, because see, again, people want to rank our losses, which we can't do. For many of us, our pets are so much a part of our family, and that when we have a loss like that, it runs so deep within us too. And for many people, that's their companion, you know. And so yes, I have done that. I actually have information about that. We talk through that. A lot of times what I want people to know when I work too, and when I use the word companion, that I'm your companion in this journey. So I look at us as being side by side. I'm right with you, right by your side. And what we're going to do is journey this together, allowing you to share with me what you're experiencing. And at the same time, though, I also bring resources into my practice too, things that will help people understand this grief and this mourning that we talk about, and how do we best try to do this in a healthy way. So yes, I have journeyed with people with pet loss too.
Thank you. How long can a person be in denial after a loss of a loved one?
Okay, so I want to share this with everyone too, because many people will say, well, I'm going through those phases of loss. Okay, when Kubler-Ross wrote her book, The Stages of Grief, she originally wrote it for the dying person. And I don't think she meant it to be that is going to be like this guideline for our grief journey. So grief is not a linear process that we go through. It's really more like riding a roller coaster, and you're holding on for your life because it's going to go up and down, right and left. So you'll never hear me tell someone a time frame for any of what they're experiencing. So for example, with denial, some of us may never experience denial. Some of us may be in denial for a short period of time. Some of us may be in denial for a year or more. So again, back to being able to talk about your loss. One of our ultimate, if I want to call it a goal or a place that I want to reach, would be this acceptance of the reality of this loss. So reconciling with it. And we do that again through the work that we choose to do. So, again, denial, shock, numbness, confusion, intellectualizing loss, which is when we go, well, that person is no longer suffering anymore. So that's what I mean by intellectualizing our loss. Can vary from person to person. And I've observed that and watched that. So there really isn't a specific time frame, for those emotions, or what I would call natural expressions of grief.
Thank you. What recommendations do you have for families that have had multiple losses related to COVID? It says my family in particular has lost 6 family members, relatives of my parents. I find that this has caused my parents to be overly fearful of COVID. They also have concerns as my brother, husband, and I are healthcare workers and exposed to COVID. While we take precautions to protect our family, they still have concerns because of all the loss they have had over the past few months.
Sure. That would be very natural to be experiencing that too. And especially, are this individual's parents, are they older, elderly, and are there other health conditions going on?
Melissa, is that the case? Yes, they're older with health conditions.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I think for one thing that we can do to help reassure ourselves is that we are taking the best precautions that we can. And I believe you said, Melissa, I extend my thank you and gratitude for your family that serves in the healthcare field, because again, I'm not in those settings, but I can't imagine all that you see and go through. So I do want to thank you for your service and supporting individuals and being there for us. It's so important, the work that you do. So yeah, again, I think it's identifying, first acknowledging and that you are doing everything possible to be cautious and careful and following the protocols that we have to follow. Again, the thing that I still will, and you'll hear me encourage, is to be able to talk through what your parents are experiencing. So if your parents have someone they can talk to about their fears, what are they fearful of? And if it's, getting COVID, then what precautions are they taking? Are they sheltering in place? Are they getting, groceries delivered to their home? What are the steps that they are taking to try not to, have those symptoms emerge within themselves? And the same thing about people working in our healthcare fields and first responders. Again, what are you fearful of? And being able to talk through those fears, if it's with your coworkers or again, another professional, what precautions are you taking? And trying to be confident in what we are doing is the best that we can do. So again, it's all back to that, being able to talk through in detail exactly what am I feeling, and trying to kind of challenge those thoughts that might be, what would I say, maybe not realistic thoughts. I can't think of the word that I want right now, but challenging thoughts that maybe aren't, realistic, and trying to find comfort in talking those things through too. Does that answer, Melissa, does that answer your question?
Yes, she said, thank you very much.
Yeah. And the one thing I do, Melissa, thanks for sharing that about your family, because I wanted to say and share with you too, this is what I call complicated grief. When families experience multiple losses like this very close together and from exactly the same thing, the pandemic, this can make grief very complicated. And sometimes you don't even have the time to mourn one loss before you're experiencing another loss. And so the grief becomes complicated because it becomes compounded, multiple losses, one right after the other. And so what happens when I have families that I work with that is we literally start with the first loss and we talk through the first loss, and then we'll move through the second loss, and then we'll move through the third loss, so that it gives the person or family the opportunity to mourn those losses one at a time. And again, it's through that guidance of talking about that specific individual, the importance they played in their life, and honoring that person, and working with the feelings that are associated with that person, any what would I say, issues that maybe weren't resolved, being able to work through those, and then going to the next person that passed away and being able to work through those things. The thing I find within families, and this is, I see this, if it's complicated grief, or, if I'm just experiencing the loss of one individual, is what happens within families is we become very protective of one another. And what I mean by that is, let's say I have my siblings and we've lost a parent during this time. And so what I may find is I might share only a little bit with my siblings, and then all of a sudden I'm going to put this wall up of protection because I don't want to add more to their grief and mourning than they're already experiencing. So what happens as families is we'll only talk so much, and then we may not be sharing some of the deep things that we need to be working through. That is when you want to go to someone outside of the family, if it's a friend, a coworker, a professional, and start having that sacred space where you can talk about those things that you may not share with your family. So when someone comes into my office, and that door closes, that becomes a very sacred space for that person. And because of being a clinical social worker, confidentiality is an important process and part of that I ethically have to adhere to. But what I'm trying to do is create that space where you can walk in, feel comfortable enough that you can become vulnerable and start working through maybe some of those intimate details of the grieving process that you aren't able to do with other individuals in your life because of the closeness of the family structure. Sometimes it takes talking to someone outside of that structure because they're not emotionally tied to the family. So then it allows you or that person to open up more freely and find that space where you can just be who you need to be. If it's tearful, and know that you're not being judged. There is no judgment here. It's strictly as just being a companion and being supportive.
Melissa did mention that she said it feels like one of the barriers was also that the relatives were out of state and out of the country, which didn't allow closure.
Yes. So they weren't able, yeah. And that's how I mentioned earlier, if we're not able to have some form of ceremony or gathering, we don't, sometimes that grief, or like Melissa's saying, they're, out of state or out of country, we don't have that opportunity then to say goodbye to the physical body and start that grieving process. So we do work on creating that. I've worked with people, and we do that in my office too, if we can't do something outside that can start that process for them too. But she's right, that can be a barrier in the grieving process too.
I have one more question, and then we can call it a night. And I would absolutely love to have you back.
Wonderful. Yeah, that would be wonderful.
How do you keep a child, or I'm sorry, how do you help a child through grief if they are unwilling to participate in counseling?
May I ask what age this child might be?
10.
10. Okay. Is this, okay, well, first of all, one thing we can create for children within our homes is that space to be able to talk about their loss. And how we do that as parents is we have to model that to them. So if the loss, let's say, is a grandparent, then I have to be willing, as let's say it's my mother, so it's a grandmother and it's my mother. In the midst of my own grief, I have to be able to create that space for this child to feel that they can talk about this person that passed away. So by me sharing, just by saying, I really miss grandma. I miss her, coming over and eating dinner with us, let's say. So if I can share some of those things, those experiences that I'm going through, that can open up that door for that child then to know it's okay for me to go to mom and talk to her about grandma. That I'm not going to make mom upset or mad if I choose to want to talk about grandma. I also encourage the parents to find ways in which this child can be expressive of their mourning, grief and mourning. So if a child likes to write, then journaling would be a good place to be able to be expressive. If the child draws, then drawing would be another creative way, or likes to take pictures. I've done that, taught a class on how do we express our grief through photography. Go out and let's take some pictures of what you're feeling and experiencing with the loss of, grandma. So they may take a picture, like they may walk out today and take a picture of a bare tree because it's lifeless. So, that may be representative to them. So if they like music, being able to express through a song, if they dance, being able to, create a dance that's representative of that. And sometimes, depending on the child, again, you can encourage them to try to go to counseling by telling them, if we can just try it and give it a couple times. And if you don't like it, then we won't come back, but maybe we should just try it. And if that child feels more comfortable with you going with them, then you go with them as the parent to the first one. A lot of times what happens with kids is they feel very anxious about going because they don't know what to expect. And so again, adults feel that same way, may have anxiety going into a counseling session because they don't know you. You know, it's like people walking in my office, they don't know me. This is going to be the first time they're going to meet me. And so, and when we work with children, a lot of times it's play therapy. So we're playing with them. It's not like they're sitting on our couch for an hour and we're staring at each other. So we incorporate play into therapy sessions too. And so, you know, try to maybe keep encouraging them just to give it a try. Otherwise, maybe try these creative ways, you know, just in the home to do that. Reading books on grief too can be helpful for kids. But again, I think really it's just if we can open that door as parents and just say, you know, anytime you want to talk to us, I'm here for you to talk to. And if we can share our feelings and share our memories, then maybe that will help them open that door for them to start processing through it too.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And if you don't mind, I will be sharing your email addresses with Delinda so she can have them too.
And then if anyone wants to get a hold of me too outside of tonight, if you go to, I can give you my email. I have no problem giving you my email and my office phone right now if you've got pens and paper ready. That way you have my information and you can contact me at any time if further questions you want to ask or any other way that I can help be supportive. I'm here for you too. So my email address is dgrindle, so DGRINDLE at kpcounseling.com. And then my phone number to the office is 779-368-0060. And you would go into extension 303. And again, if you don't mind her sharing your emails with me, I'd be more than, happy. I have resources. So if then you want more specific resources because you're experiencing like loss of a sibling, a grandparent, a parent, I have many different resources that I can email you or either mail you if I only have them in brochure form. I can do that. I have this article on hope. And so there's just different resources that I have available that I can get out to you too, if it's through email or mail and answer any questions that you have.
We have many, many thank yous for an excellent presentation.
Well, you're very welcome. And if I'm more than happy to come back and be more specific, if if there's individuals that want to talk about anything more specifically. And I thank you because I know it's a very broad topic. And so I hope I was able to just touch a little bit on some different things for everyone.
You did great.
Thank you.
Well, we hope to see you soon. And I hope everyone has a good night.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, and take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.